welcome in, Allie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, Grace, great to be here.
So we worked together a couple years ago at another organization, and I was able to see firsthand what your skill set was at that point, and I know it's only evolved over the years. But something that I was very, very interested in always was the business development side of things, and so you were one of the first people that I was like, you know what, I got to get her in here so we can pick her brain. Because not only is she someone who's in it and does it well, but she also learned from some of the best. So was very, very excited to have you join me and just grateful.
Yeah, look, this is one of my favorite topics. Could talk about it a lot longer than we probably have today. But yes, I was fortunate to have a lot of good mentors speak into me and my career, and have been able to take that on. Do some really cool stuff, things I'm really passionate about. So excited for the conversation.
For sure. So let's just start baseline. What got you into where you are now? So you're in obviously business development at an executive level, but what even got you into where you were ushering yourself into that space? Because as I think I remember correctly, you told me you were an accountant.
That's
So
right. Look,
like, what's going on? How do we get here?
that's right. Hey, the end of the day, to God be the glory for directing my path into something that I truly am passionate about. But yeah, my path has been a little unconventional. So I started as a CPA and an auditor with a large professional services firm. So, obviously a foundation in compliance, really understanding how organizations operate in highly, complicated models, operate under scrutiny, and so that ended up leading me into a government services division that the firm I was working for had at the time. And so that division really supported states and local governments in administering programs that are funded through federal dollars,
Mm,
often to benefit, low to moderate income populations and, folks at some of their most vulnerable times. So it was something that I really resonated with, had a passion just for the work in general. But I started in project management, really like client service executive, client management type roles.
yeah.
And my main goal was to build and maintain strong relationships with our clients, making sure that our teams delivered the way that we needed to.
Yeah.
But same as you, I've always been really interested in business development. The strategy, the growth.
Mhm.
But it honestly took me really learning how those programs operate to ultimately become effective in all of those areas. And so, just kind of naturally over time, my role evolved into more of a business development role, really helping expand our growth through new verticals, adjacent markets. And then today, I serve as a vice president of strategic growth for a very fast growing technology company where I focus really on our enterprise growth, entering into new markets, but still serving state and local governments in a similar way that I did before.
You mentioned that these federal dollars come down to help specifically the areas that need it the most. So disaster relief, specifically around even COVID, things that happened back in 2020 through like what, 2022, 2023. And then I don't know if you were around at that organization when Katrina hit. So I don't know if you were a part of, that as well, but passion for being able to assist people, help people, and then finding a niche, something that you're really good at in that space to be able to do that indirectly or directly is a blessing for sure.
Absolutely.
So you like you said, you spent a lot of your time in like the government services sector of things, so very highly regulated environments, government contracting. How would you say you learned to execute the skills required to develop the trust with clients? So you said you kind of started in that space with the client management, project management. What were some of the things that you had to learn as you went to really say, okay, here's how I can develop a trust-based relationship with current clients and then turning them into return clients and then future clients?
Yeah. So what I found in these highly regulated environments, trust and relationships aren't built through charm alone. That does
Mm,
help. You need to be a likable person. People, they gotta want to maybe sit down and have dinner or drink with you, whatever you prefer. But it's that's table stakes. And the real magic is through credibility and consistency. These
Mhm.
government leaders, they really operate under enormous pressure. You know,
Yeah.
you think about these programs, they're publicly funded, these decisions get audited. Oftentimes, you see it in the news. There's a lot of political pressure
Mhm.
tied to these outcomes. And at the end of the day, like they're applicants and constituents, sometimes, these government leaders' neighbors that are ultimately benefiting from these programs and they need immediate assistance. So when you're able to show up in a room as really a partner,
Mhm.
you have to understand that ecosystem that they're operating in. And so, there was a part of my life where in my career that I all wanted to do was business development. I just couldn't wait to only do that. And looking back on it, so much of that understanding comes from lived experiences.
Mhm.
So that time that I spent in project management and those client, executive roles, they're so invaluable in the way that now I can connect with folks, that actually need the services that the company I work for provides. So for me, this relationship building, it's meant taking time to really understand the pressures and the responsibilities that my clients carry and making sure that we can operate responsibly.
Yeah. I was watching something not too long ago. This lady does some kind of sales, and she was talking about where a lot of people fail when it comes to selling or promoting something is that they talk about the product like, "Oh, this is why I think it's such
Hmm.
a great product or such a great service," and so you're listing off a whole bunch of different facts and figures
Hmm.
and, things that you think sound flashy, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to gauge in that moment what that person or what that client needs and how that will be solutioned by whatever you're offering. So, I just piggybacking off of what you just said, like, you have to understand the pressure, the information that's coming from 50 million different directions for them, the things that they're having to consider, because we may want the contract executed ASAP so we can go ahead and help them,
Yeah.
but realistically, they're dealing with 50 other things internally that prevent that from happening, so you can't just come in hot and be like, "What's going on? What are we doing?" Because you have to
Yeah.
take that into consideration, so, yeah.
Yeah. And, every state, every grantee, every area of the country, is a little different and unique in their own way. So there's also not just a out of the box, one size fits all solution for these programs or these clients. Like it is really truly trying to understand. They may have commonalities in
Mhm.
what they're struggling with or where their concerns are, but it's understanding that it's very unique, to them and trying to connect that to what you ultimately can provide to solve that problem.
Yeah. So you would recommend that anybody that's interested in business development at this level or whether in this sector and industry or something else, you would recommend that they start in a position that allows them to kind of see and experience some things a little bit more that are aligned with whatever they're going to be trying to sell, whatever service or whatever, product
Yep.
they're pushing.
Yeah, my personal perspective is definitely now. I think there are different ways to do it. Part of my path was where sometimes I had, you know, one foot on both sides. I was, in the operations, I was learning that side, but I was also still learning business development. So I think there's kind of a hybrid model. But
Mhm.
regardless of what model you deploy, like you really do have to have a deep understanding of the folks that you're trying to support,
Yeah.
what their problems are, and then how does your solution actually work? Like you got
Mhm.
to be able to peel past, the first layer of the onion and be able to get a little deeper with them.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about kind of like sitting in between that operational and that sales place or business
Mhm.
development place. So I'm more and have been in my career thus far more of an operational mind. Like that's kind of where I've been. That's how I've operated. What is your perspective on those mindsets, the different kind of elements it takes for you to be able to thrive in one space versus the other, and then melding them together because I had a supervisor or boss a couple of years ago who used to use the analogy like you got 2 guys going out to a cabin and they need something to eat, and one of them says, "Okay, I'm gonna go kill a bear." He goes, he kills the bear, he brings it back and says, "Alright, y'all figure out what to do with this while I'll go catch catch the next one?" So, like, that I think that fairly accurately describes it, but what are your thoughts on the differences there?
Yeah, so, there's always this kinda natural tension
Mhm,
between business development and operations where, you know, business development or sales, however you wanna say it, for me, it's business
mhm,
development, but tends to see opportunity where, the operations can tend to maybe see consequences or the bear that they're about to have
mhm,
to, skin and fillet and all the things that come along with that. I think
mhm,
that both perspectives are really essential. If business development alone dominates, then you end up in a spot where you risk selling things that your organization can't deliver.
yeah,
If operations dominate, then you can become so risk averse that you don't grow at the pace that maybe the organization is capable of. So
mhm,
I think that I have seen where a healthy organization is really one that creates collaboration between
mhm,
those two perspectives,
mhm,
so that your growth is ambitious, but it's also responsible and sustainable.
yeah,
But it's also everybody, just finding. Um, Finding confidence in the piece that naturally drives them the most, like making sure that people are sitting on the right seat
mhm,
of the bus, but then
mhm.
how you bring those two worlds together to complement each other.
I think it's funny because, like you said, there's, like, almost you have to have a middleman, but it's so hard to find people who have that skill set to be able to sit in the middle. So even if we're talking about business development on the scale that you've done it, in the industry you've done it, or even if we're talking about for like, let's just say a small business that's trying to scale or trying to grow at whatever pace, most of the time you've got your doers, you got your your other people there. It's very hard to find that brain that can balance both. Uh, and so I just think that's funny because
Yeah.
it's they're so different. They're both necessary, like you said, but, like, just that lane that's right there in between that's like, "Okay, here's what we can do. Here's what we can do now. Here's what
Mhm.
we possibly do, so we're gonna go out and find some money from some people that, actually need this service," versus execution and stuff is
Yeah.
always fun. So while we're talking about kind of like being in that space of between operational necessity and business development necessity, how important have you found like a structure in as far as direction of growth? Because I think whether it's a large organization or it's a smaller one, you may find that we wanna get everything. We wanna take everything that we can get because we're striving for a number. We wanna hit this number this year, so we're just gonna go grab whatever we can get, or we just wanna see growth, period. So we're just gonna take whatever we can get until we find what our lane is. Have you found that that can prevent successful scaling or successful growth, or that it can work either way?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on where probably a company is in their phase, the answer may vary. But if you're coming into it, whether you're a small company or a large company, but your goal is ultimately, um, to create a scalable model, then you do have to evaluate and have some form of, structure, direction, and alignment. I think that becomes increasingly important as you begin to, really scale, really grow.
Mhm.
Early on, I think growth can happen pretty organically. You,
Yeah.
you may see where you have a few people with strong relationships bringing in opportunities, but as that organization scales, you really have to start finding clarity around where you're focusing.
Mhm.
What success looks like, how your teams work together on what's being promised. I've seen without that alignment that you can end up pursuing opportunities that really don't fit with your capabilities,
Yeah.
or you're stretching your teams in ways that aren't sustainable.
Mhm.
So, for me, structure also isn't about slowing things down. You can't
Right.
over engineer structure, but it's about creating clarity. I think when people understand, the priorities, the expectations, how different parts of the organization support each other, it
Mhm.
actually makes growth a lot more durable and oftentimes a lot more enjoyable for everybody,
Yeah.
for those on the business development side, for those on the operations side. But yes, I'm a strong advocate for the right balance of, that structure and alignment.
Yeah. So how do you get to a place where you can kinda train people to be in this space or kind of groom people to be able to operate successfully in this space, whether it is at a large scale? Because you like you were just saying, you gotta do what makes sense for your organization, for the
Mhm.
resources that you have, whether that's people, tools, whatever. How do you train someone to kind of come up and be able to execute in the business development side of things effectively?
Yeah. I think some of it, it's not just about being extroverted or, charismatic. Some of the best relationship builders that I've seen will probably tell you that some of them naturally are introverts. But
Yeah.
I have watched that they are very thoughtful observers.
Mhm.
And so they spend a lot of time listening, asking good questions, taking time to understand, what we talked about at the beginning, really, what are the pressures a client's facing? What are the things that they're struggling with? And so when I think about training people, it's really trying to focus um, on curiosity, on
Okay.
patience, that long-term thinking.
Mhm.
But if someone can understand that broader system that a client is operating in, they can build a much stronger relationship over time. I also think that just training through kind of what we talked about before on, whether it's boots on the ground, running a stint in a
Mhm.
program or whatever, your particular line of business is, but, trying to get hands on with the day to day makes you so much more powerful when you're in rooms trying to talk to people about how you're going to solve their problems.
Yeah, for sure. So there's not a specific personality type that you have to be able to do this. It's
Yeah, I
just
think, the biggest thing that I found is sometimes people can try to force themselves to want to do business development just because
Mhm.
they, hear about some of what they think it is.
Mhm.
And yeah, there is a piece of this where you really got to understand what it means to be in business development. And
Mhm.
it's got to be something that naturally energizes you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to be, kind of fighting yourself. And so I think there's a lot, especially somebody that might be kind of newer in their career or journey and
Mhm.
where they're trying to go. It's doing a lot of self reflection on, what role do you really want to play? Is it business development or are you more comfortable in operations, but you just kind of feel forced into a business development role? So I think that's important to determine first.
So what are some of those, like, underlying elements of business development that you've experienced, that you've seen, um, that you think people just don't really know about? You don't really know until you're in it. You don't know if it's for you until you're in it and you're like, "Oh, no, I can't do this." I mean, we know travel can often be a huge part of that and weeks on end kind of travel, but what are some things that and others that you've noticed over the years?
Yeah, I think some of those maybe common misconceptions that people have is one that it took me a little while to learn, but it's not just flying on planes and having a good time.
Mhm.
Business development in complex markets is really hard. It takes a lot of grit. It takes a lot of determination, and a lot of people think going into it that it's easy without that full appreciation for what it really takes. It does mean sacrifices away from your family, getting on planes and traveling. In my particular market, there is usually a lot of urgency around, the way in which buyers are trying to procure services or things like
Mhm.
that. See a request for proposal where you're having to bid on this work, and they have short turnaround times, but they have
Yeah.
a lot, within them that you have to do. So, you spend a lot of time sacrificing on some of the things that it takes to ultimately see the business development life cycle through in the end. And I think
Mhm.
there are, a lot of folks that may have a snapshot of one piece of the life cycle without a full appreciation for what it takes from start to finish. I mean, there are pursuits that I've had, um, one in particular that kind of finally just shook out, but that particular um, program. I mean, I had been pursuing it for 3 years, as they waited to try to get funding in place and, do their procurement and all the things. So, I mean, there's a lot more to it than I think what people see. The other, kind of common misconception and thing that I think people focus on sometimes is that success might only be measured in how many
Mm,
deals you close.
yeah.
And what I have found in these markets is it's often just as important to know what opportunities not to pursue, and the discipline to be able to walk away from what may not be right.
Mm,
Good business development requires a lot of judgment.
mhm.
It requires understanding what really aligns with your organization and where you can add value to clients.
Yeah, and I also was thinking even the relationships that may shake out from those business development efforts may not actualize in a contract right then,
Yeah.
but they may come back around to you a couple of years later when they're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I remember I talked to this organization. They did this. Maybe we can get with them and, have those conversations." I
Yeah,
think
and
that's
you gotta have enough confidence in yourself and just the ability to let go of,
yeah.
kind of the final answer, if you will, to be okay with being rejected and it not be personal.
Yeah.
To be okay with, reaching out and maybe not getting a response, to find
Mhm.
another angle to reach somebody that you really think that you could add value to. So there's a lot in that piece, that I think sometimes people have a hard time being comfortable with that side of it.
Yeah. Like you said, that grit, is
Mhm.
required, and the other thing you mentioned that I thought was huge for people to know is, like, the measurements of your success look different in business development. So, we'll just use project management as an example. You start a project, whatever the parameters are for that project, you execute those, you close it out, success. You got all the money, nothing's on fire, you're good. But with things like business development, it can be the relationship. It can be, we could have gone this direction, but
Mhm.
that wouldn't have been a good look for us. So I've saved us the time,
Mhm.
the energy, the resources from going through something that ultimately wasn't for us. And then, yeah, sometimes that contract closing or you
Yeah.
getting that client. Yeah. You talked a little bit about the business development kind of timeline, or not timeline, but the pipeline, the whole process itself. So, I know it looks different depending on, where you are, what industry you're in, what business you are going after, but if you could generalize it into some steps, what would those be?
So, let me start with this. When I retire one day, no idea when that's going to be, but I'm going to come back because this podcast is still going to be
It
rocking and
is.
rolling and we're going to have millions of followers. But
Yep.
I'm going to come back and outline that full playbook. But I'm going to say right now, and I'm going to answer this in a little on the high level side because I do operate in
Sure.
a very highly competitive market. So
Mhm, mhm,
the way that I tend to think about business development, and just really kind of the global theme that I would say
mhm.
someone should think about is it's less selling and it's more alignment.
Okay.
Especially, speaking again from kind of more of a complex environment, these highly regulated markets, growth happens like we've talked about when you really understand that problem that you're trying to solve and when you can align your capabilities to that reality. For me, it's always been relational and not transactional.
Yeah.
When I sit across from someone or when I respond to an RFP and, I'm committing to solving a problem,
Mhm.
that's personal for me,
Yeah.
and if we're fortunate enough to get selected to solve that problem, I'm going to want to ensure that we do everything that we say we're going to do. So that's kind of like overarching theme for me when I think just about approach of business development. I think from a step standpoint, and again, it does depend on the market that you're in, but I think it's really important to anchor yourself in who you are, who you're trying to be, because I think that helps dictate what you go after. That ultimately drives what the next step is.
Mhm.
Um, it's understanding your target audience and market really well. Who are they? What are they trying to solve? What's important to them? And then really making sure that you have a good appreciation for, it doesn't matter if you're in a regulated market or you're B2B, somebody's got
Mhm.
to purchase in some form or fashion. So
Mhm.
making sure that you've got a good appreciation for what that buying cycle looks like before you ever even head into the market. You got to know your steps. You got to know what is ahead of you to get, from
Yeah.
A ultimately to Z. Making sure that you've got the right people in place to support that. That can look different in a lot of different markets. For ours in particular, like I mentioned, the procurement process is there are a lot of steps to it. There's a lot of work that companies have to do to submit on those procurements, and so making sure that you're well staffed, you got the right people in place to respond to those, and then it's probably true for any market, but you still gotta close the deal. There's a
Yeah.
contract that has to be signed. There's risks that you've gotta understand. There are certain risks that you've gotta be willing to accept to ultimately, do business with that prospect or that client. So making sure that you've got a good handle on, your approach for that and how you're ultimately gonna get it to the finish line. I think another piece too that's really important just as I think about my personal steps and journey is you also then at some point, like we've talked a lot about operations and business development, that has to transition. Usually your business development team is not always going to be the team that's going to operate the programs. And oftentimes for good reason. They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
subject matter experts. They know it, but not to the same level that people that you've got supporting do. And so I've tried to find ways throughout the process to really make sure that I'm integrating my operations team well
Mhm.
ahead so that from a client perspective, they don't have a jolting experience,
Yeah.
when they move from one part of the cycle to the next.
When it comes to, you talked about that transition, and that kinda got me thinking about, I guess, like, that right seat position as you go through that. At what point do you say you incorporate them early, but at what point are you like, "You know what? Yeah, let's go ahead and bring in operations for this," even in possibly well, I know they're probably involved in the procurement process as well, but at what point are you like, "Let's go ahead and rope them in a way that does not create any confusion," or,
Mhm.
because that can sometimes become a thing as well. At what point would you say, I'm not saying to tell us exactly what the secret sauce is, but what would you say is a good time or a good way to consider, like, "Okay, we need to start bringing in our operational resources as well?"
Yeah, I think that I've tried a couple of different models. Still, trial and error on figuring out
Yeah.
the right balance because you've
Mhm.
got your operations team that has a book of business and clients that they're actively serving. So you're trying not to pull on them, too much.
Mhm.
One method that I found pretty effective uh, previously is having at least like so the role that I played before I really stepped, largely into business development was that client service executive role where, I wasn't necessarily day to day managing the project, but I was overseeing a portfolio of clients. I was making sure that those clients were served well. So I had capacity to, like I mentioned earlier, like play a little bit in both sides and
Mhm.
so I think a model like that, I can see effective where you do have some more operationally minded people that are still serving clients. They're
Yeah.
still leaning in that way, but they've got kind of a bucket of excess capacity that you're investing in for them to be able to be part of at least a couple of, once you've vetted the opportunity, you and a prospect have, kind of hit it off. You think that you really could add value to them, that you could serve that client well. I mean, you still got to go through the procurement process, but I think introducing that person then, and letting them start getting acclimated to the client, is probably a pretty good balance.
Yeah. How do you pick out that person? I mean, like, they're operational, but, like, how do you pick out the person that's like, "Okay, yeah, we can start introducing them on this side without creating any kind of overlap that could cause confusion in other areas?"
Yeah,
And
and that is such a highly sought after role and skill set from
yeah.
my vantage point. I think that historically, what I have found is looking for somebody that, just has a really good executive presence, somebody that understands the subject matter enough. And not just subject matter, but it's like what we talked about earlier. They've done enough of these programs. They've already operated at more of that, executive level for the program and ops side that
Mhm.
they can immediately resonate with the problems this client is about to face. They
Yeah.
can come in and establish credibility and trust with that client from speaking lived experiences. And it ultimately just kind of starts getting the client comfortable with us, our level of service, our caliber of leadership. So those are some of the traits that, I look for in a role like that. Somebody that's really kind of already serving in that client executive or that client management type role.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going a little bit off script here, but
Go for it.
what has been your, if you have one, your most memorable experience in business development, whether it was a win, a loss, something in between? Like what's been your most memorable experience in this line of work?
Yeah. So my most memorable, again, I can look back on some of my experiences where I thought that I just knew everything about business development and I had this thing figured out, and I still don't. I think anybody that tells you they do is lying because it evolves, and
Mhm.
there's always something new to learn in this space. But uh, um, one of my prior experiences, so I was pursuing basically a national strategy. It was kind of a test run for a company that I worked for where we had never really had like a full blown 50 state national strategy. This was in a market for us that was new. It was adjacent to some of the things that we had done before, but it was a particularly new market. And so my previous mentors basically just sent me off to the races. They were like, go try to make something out of this.
Yeah.
And so through that experience, I really kind of got to shape and create my personal playbook on how to do that. Um, and the company that I was with had we had not established a presence with this
Yeah.
particular set um, of state agencies. And so, I had been told by some like cold calling's not going to work. That's not going to get you anywhere. You got to do it this way, that way. And I had a mentor who's he's great, and he was the one that was always thinking outside of the box. And he was like, just try it, just send him an email. And so I did, like totally random, totally cold call. Um, and they responded and they asked me to come meet with them, different states. So I jumped on a plane, I got my rental car, and I had about an hour and a half commute to get to the client's office. And I can just remember that moment being one of the first where like I had been alongside someone in a
Yeah.
lot of different experiences, but it was the first time that like I went out there, I, kind of created something from nothing and found my way into a door to get to sit across from a client and tell them, how I wanted to solve their problem and how I wanted to serve them and how I hoped that they could ultimately be my client. That particular client, we did not end up winning that, but I still
Mhm.
see that client at conferences all the time and have a great relationship with them. But I can like vividly remember the rental car, the sunroof open, like I was
Mhm.
in my zone headed to that meeting. So I don't know, it was just the kind of that turning point of confidence and like
Mhm.
I can do this,
Yeah.
not ever by myself because there's nothing you ever do by yourself. But it was just that kind of wings, spread and you realize that I was made for this.
Yeah. I mean, and people talk about sink or swim all the time.
Hmm.
But that is the epitome of it right there,
Yeah.
like, just try it, see what happens, and I was just about to ask you, like, how transformative was that for your confidence? You said like that, okay.
Look, I had the radio on, I was jamming, like I was in the zone. It
Yeah.
was a great time. I will probably always remember that experience.
So what are 3 pieces of advice you would give to an organization regarding their strategic relationship building efforts for growth? So we've talked about a couple of
Hmm.
things already, understanding, what it is you're gonna do, what you wanna
Hmm.
do, what direction you wanna go in, what you can do, and what the
Hmm.
gap is between the 2. So what are some other things that you would say to, let's just say, like, a mid-size organization that's kinda looking to see some significant growth in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think, and I touched on this a little bit, but starting with just a genuine curiosity. Um, understanding what challenges are you trying to solve before you try to solve them. Don't be afraid to walk in a room and just try to be curious and listen and
Yeah.
hear. Every room you walk in doesn't have to leave with a slam dunk. It doesn't have to leave with what you think is going to be a closed deal, but just getting out there in the market, and understanding what people are struggling with. I think that oftentimes people will just jump to, I guess now it's ChatGPT, it used to be Google.
Yeah.
But trying to use, just sitting behind a screen and the internet to determine what the market needs and wants. And you
Okay.
have to get out there and find out. And you have to be willing, sometimes to walk out of a room and be like, well, I botched that, and that is
Yeah.
not what the market needs. But that was another like kind of that whole process that I talked about a minute ago.
Mhm.
There is nothing more valuable than just reps of being in front of clients,
Yeah.
sitting in front of them, hearing them, understanding. So that would probably be the biggest piece of advice for me is just get out there,
Yeah.
get out there and start the conversations. Eventually it'll all kind of come together on where you need to head.
Okay. So what would be your encouragement to, let's just say, a young Allie, CPA? What would you say to her, knowing what you know now, knowing where she was at that where you were at that point, in hopes that, it would encourage her or someone else in the same or similar position?
Be bold and be very open to exploring what you may not have thought was your plan.
Mhm.
Um, if you would have ever told me that I would have been anything other than a CPA partner at a CPA firm, I would have told you that you were crazy.
Yeah.
But that experience that I had in my time as a CPA and an auditor is invaluable to me. Like I learned so many things that I still take with me into the work that I do um, today.
Mhm.
But I knew in my heart, and I think God directed me that that was not naturally aligned with who I was or what I wanted to do. But being bold and, trusting enough in his path and plan to explore other things, explore
Mhm.
other options. And that doesn't always mean that you have to completely change your career field. I mean, you
Right.
can get out in the world and, you know, podcast or volunteer, like just
Mhm.
have other experiences
Yeah.
than just one thing.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other thing I would say is I think I wish that someone would have, if I could go back and tell that Allie, um, based on what I know now, is you don't realize how important building a network
Mhm.
is, regardless of what field you're in, and regardless of if you're in business development. I mean, it could be a matter of you trying to solve a problem for a company and you know somebody else at another company that may be trying to solve the same problem. So I just think that early in careers, you're so focused on learning your trade and climbing the ladder and all of those things that you can lose sight of how important a network is around you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was just thinking about this. When you said something, it was something you said that triggered this. We didn't even talk about, like, your education, like, really get into any of that. I mean, we know you started off as a CPA,
Yep.
but what kinda got you into that? I feel like that's important as well for someone who may be following in your
Yeah.
footsteps soon.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I was actually just talking to my husband the other day. We were back on campus. We both went to the same college, and we were going to a luncheon that they had there, and I was like, it's just wild to me the way that like my career has taken turns and the exposure that I have now to how many businesses are out there, how many things there are in this world, how
Mhm.
many problems you can actually solve. So
Yeah.
how I got into accounting, um, my dad had a really good friend that was a CPA, and I knew I was business minded. Like I was always leaned in that direction. So I knew I wanted to do something in that area. And he just gave me the advice. He's like, look, if you're going to do it, like just major in accounting, even if you don't end up doing that, because
Yeah.
you're more specialized and, it's easier to at least get kind of a launching point in your
Mhm,
career rather than just a general business degree. Not
mhm.
that those can't be valuable too, but that was his advice to me. So that was the advice that I followed. And it did not take me long in my career to be like, so what else is out in this universe? But I had, a great experience. I went to Mississippi College. I majored in accounting, then I got my MBA there with emphasis in accounting. So again, I mean, just the skills that you learn in that profession really they translate into so many other areas of just
Yeah,
general business. So that foundation for me is invaluable. So it's same thing. I know I keep going back to curiosity. That's kind of I would say maybe my theme. But
yeah,
to those that are maybe in college or they're trying to decide if path, like just be curious.
yeah,
Try to get an understanding of what all's out there in the world, to do. And also know that you can always change it. Like
yeah,
I had this, I guess, thought for so long that I had to pick a path and I couldn't leave that path. And it was scary too, but man, life is just it's meant to be explored. And if you find yourself in a spot that may not be exactly where you thought you'd be, you can always change it.
yeah. And I mean, especially I think right now too, where you're seeing a lot of people. I mean, the job market is not, what it once was. So you have a lot of
Mhm.
people who are either been let go or been forced to
Yep.
kind of be in a position where they're pivoting or they're choosing like, okay, I need to do something different. And just you mentioned this earlier too, just being open to the fact that like it may not look the same. My degree, I never spent any time in that field. It's
Yeah.
in rehab services with a focus in addiction studies. Never. When I left, I didn't do anything
Mhm.
with it. And so if you had told me I'd be doing what I'm doing, someone else may have believed you, but it wouldn't have been me. So, like, I completely understand, and I think that's so important for people, just the openness, the ability, the beauty in being able to pivot when the opportunities present themselves,
Yep.
because you may choose for it to happen or it may be forced upon you, but either way,
Mhm.
just been being curious, like you said, and
Yeah.
taking it in stride. Do you have anything else that you feel like you wanna bless us with as far as knowledge,
You
anything that
know,
we on?
the only other thing that I would leave with is, and it's one of the most important things for me in this line of work, but
Mm,
at all cost, protect your credibility.
mm,
I had a mentor tell me years ago that, as long as you do what you say you're going to do, you're going to be
yeah,
okay. And in business and in just in the world and in some of these complex markets, it can get really hard to do what you say you're going to do.
yeah,
The problems stack up, that doesn't always align with the budget that you set out with. And, maintain that credibility, maintain that integrity, serve clients well. I think if you can master that in your complex markets, that trust ultimately compounds over time.
yeah.
Your reputation is your currency.
That's huge. That's
Hmm.
huge because, like you said, it can it can be intentional or it can be unintentional
Yeah.
where it's like, actually,
Hmm.
we can't do that or it's gonna be a little bit harder." And being able to I've seen in some situations where you just kinda have to eat
Yeah.
the the whatever it is to get it done, you just kinda gotta eat that to get it done, but to your point, protecting that credibility,
Yeah.
as an organization and business
Yeah.
development
And
goes a
look,
long
you and I have actually been in the trenches before on, something going wrong where it's
Yep,
like, okay, we've got two paths that we can take. We can either, blame this on somebody else, brush this off, not fix the problem, but we chose to dive in, we chose to some of the say sometimes bottom line be damn, we were gonna do right by the client. And, I think back on that experience that you and I had together and like I think that client still holds me and you both in the company and in very high regard on,
yeah,
that was just a really
that was a time.
yeah, it was. But it
Yeah,
turned out well. And those are times that
mm,
even through mistakes that I'm really proud of the way that, I showed up and served a client. And I
yeah.
think that's what matters.
Showed up quickly,
Mhm.
effectively, confidently, yep, and ultimately solved the solution or solved the problem, came up with a
Yeah.
solution, so yeah, well Anything else? I mean, I know you have there we probably haven't even tapped the tip of the iceberg with all of the information you have to give in this arena and others. So we'll definitely have to circle back. But is there anything else that you're just like, let me make sure they know this? they
No, I think that we have covered, like you said, a lot. This is a topic that I'm super passionate about and would
yeah.
love to jump on and join again in the future.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna hold you to that retirement in 50 years. whenever whenever you decide.
Look, I've
Um,
already got plans. When I hit the retire button, one day, I love speaking into others on, again, some of what I've learned on my own, but also a lot of what people poured into me and how to do this, how to do it well. So I can't wait for the day that I get to more freely share some of that knowledge.
yeah, for sure. So whatever part of the world you're in, because I feel like you'll be in another country. I'm gonna find you, and we're gonna have this conversation 2.0. Sure.
Yes, absolutely. I love it.
Well, I appreciate you so much, Allie, for joining and having this conversation with me. I know there's a lot of great information that came out of it that'll help someone. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we talked about not just in specific industries, but just the skill sets, the mindset, the direction that you have to have in business development, because that can be utilized for a small business up the street from me or all the way up to some kind of large Fortune 500 corporation. And so very, very excited to put this out there for anybody who needs this kind of information and needs people like you on their board to help inform how they go forward in business and in life. So I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Grace.